This is a CBC podcast.
I'm Bob McKeown, and this is Secrets of the Fifth Estate, where we take you deep inside some of our most powerful and memorable stories. This week, Gillian Findlay and Theresa Burke investigate a tragedy in a small town.
Okay, you ready? Hello. So one of the things that we feel is important as journalists is we try to get both sides of any story. And so we thought it was important that we at least try to reach out to Basil Borutski.
This is Bell Canada. You have a collect call from
Basil Borutski.
You may press 1 now to accept the charges. Press 2.
Hello?
Thank you.
Hello?
Hello,
Is this Mr. Borutski?
this is.
Thank you for calling me.
You're welcome.
I'm guessing that the fact you did call me means that you have something that you would like to say. So maybe we could start our conversation by having you tell me what that is.
Not really. I just was wondering why you wanted to talk to me.
Well, we'd like to talk to you because you have been charged with the murder of 3 women. We'd like to know if indeed you did murder them, and if so, why?
Nothing is quite that simple.
Hearing his voice after spending time in the location and with the families that had been so damaged was it's hard to separate those two things.
There's a long story before we ever get to any part of that, or the 20-year history here.
Okay, what's the story you want to tell us?
Well, I don't think I can tell you.
It was a bit one-dimensional, and I think he became hostile when he understood that we were only going to indulge so much of his victimhood and how nobody understood him and how he'd always been, all these people had always been out to get him. Mr. Borutski, I want to ask you about what happened on September 22nd.
I just told you that the important part is to what brought up to that. If you wanted,
He seemed to be artificially controlling his voice.
led up to this.
I understand you are upset and angry at a criminal justice system.
And in fact, one of the things he said, Gillian said something to him about being angry, and it's one of the many places where he corrected her. He corrected her and said,
I'm not upset and I'm not angry. I am frustrated.
I'm frustrated. And it was, you could see that he wanted to be thought of as a calm but victimized person. It was interesting to then continue on and do the story and do the filming and be in that region and in these places where he had been with his voice in your head. We started on this story simply because we'd read something in the newspaper. 3 women in one small rural community killed allegedly by the same man, a man they all had at some point had some kind of a relationship with. We would later find out, actually, that this was indeed the worst case of multiple partner domestic homicide in Canada's history.
I'm Theresa Burke, and I'm a producer at the Fifth Estate.
The murders happened September 22nd. The leaves were already starting to change color. It was spectacularly beautiful. And I remember thinking on several trips up there just how it seemed so juxtaposed with what had happened.
And what really struck us at the time was how little attention this seemed to get. It wasn't leading all the newscasts. It wasn't the big headlines. There were, stories that were done in the local newspapers and out of Ottawa. But, beyond that, we couldn't find anything. And it just struck us as strange. And so we thought, well, that's an interesting phenomenon. If nobody else is going to look at this and what happened and why, then maybe that's something we should do.
One of the things that I kept commenting on every time we went up there is the distances that had to be driven between the homes of the three women. It was so long, and you just think, how could anyone maintain a kind of murderous rage through that distance?
The three women were Natalie Warmerdam, Anastasia Kuzak, and Carol Culloden.
We wanted to reach out to the families right away because it was so important that these women became known beyond how they died.
The three women were all really very different, different ages, different backgrounds. The one thing that they'd had in common is that all at one point had a relationship with Basil Borutski. Natalie Warmerdam was a woman who was from that area originally, grew up there, went back as an adult, wanted to raise her own family there.
My grandmother basically said, stay away from him, and my mom didn't listen.
Why did your grandmother say that? Do you know?
Because she'd heard about bad things with him and his ex-wife.
She had gone back to school as a later in life to become a nurse. She was a palliative care nurse. She traveled around the county, and it was actually through her work in palliative care that she first met Basil Borutski. She was helping to nurse his father when his father was dying.
She was in the habit of backing into parking spots so she could leave quickly if, for example, he showed up where she was. And she had a tactical pen in her purse so she could defend herself. At one point, he threatened to kill Mom's dog. He threatened to skin my brother if he ever caught the damn boy.
Anastasia Kuzak was younger, single.
She did tell me at one point that she trusted Basil, so he at some point convinced Stacia that he was innocent.
I said to her, he seems to be stalking you.
Carol Culloden is actually not from the community. She was from Ottawa, but she owned a cottage in the area.
I did ask her if it was safe for her to go up to the cottage by herself. And she said yes. He was well aware that, she wanted nothing to do with him, and she didn't see any imminent danger.
All my alarm bells went off.
She said, Basil's at the house with a gun.
By that day, September 22nd, 2015, up until that point, Basil Borutski had a long history of violence against women. His first wife, I think over the course of their 26-year-old marriage, 3 or 4 times he was accused and charged of violence towards her. And for a variety of reasons, the charges didn't result in conviction. Sometimes they didn't even get to court. And that was known within the community or certain parts of the community. Natalie Warmerdam had, at the end of her relationship with him, had filed charges with the police, and those did not go to court. Anastasia Kuzak had been beaten by him severely. She did go to court, and he was convicted. There was such a concern that Natalie Warmerdam was at one point given a panic button to wear for fear, that she would see him in the community, or, she lives in a rather isolated place, so it was for her safety that it was suggested to her she might want to have a panic button. At one point, we learned afterwards she bought herself a gun. And then everything culminates on that day.
I heard screaming, and Stacia had already been attacked by him.
I had called her earlier, and then finally I started sending texts at 9:23. And 9:50, I wasn't hearing from her. I said, call me when you get my message.
I was very, very close to where he was with the gun. He could have turned around and shot at me, but he must have been focusing on shooting my sister. Mm-hmm. And I ran for my life. He had the gun like that, He was walking very quickly, and within 2 or 3 seconds, I heard him shoot.
And I ran over to Mom's, and we got in the car, we came over to Station's house, and the policeman said she's dead.
We saw this man coming, and the system did nothing.
We titled the program, Why Didn't We Know?
Like, why didn't we know? Something's wrong with our justice system. Something's wrong with people who didn't realize he's a serious offender when for years he's been beating women.
One of the most powerful clips in the piece comes from the sister of Anastasia Kuzik, and she's clearly distraught, and she's saying, look at, this guy had such a history with the courts, with the police, with probation officers. People in the community knew he was violent. Why didn't we know?
Why didn't we know? Why didn't we acknowledge the seriousness of this person's violent behavior?
Why didn't anybody tell us? Why didn't we deal with this guy before all of this happened? So much of the answer is, well, we did know, we just didn't do anything. People did know, the police knew, there was a court record, judges knew, his probation officers knew, neighbors knew, former wives and girlfriends knew, people knew.
There are 3 families that have been absolutely devastated by this. And I don't want there to be any more.
I certainly know and have met over the years, both professionally and in my private life, women who have been in bad relationships, who have been hurt by men, who have been abused, and their children have been abused. I mean, yeah, it's there. We don't like to talk about it much. We don't acknowledge it really. I think we certainly don't deal with it in a systemic way in which we have taking this on as a way to look at our institutions that deal with these issues and figure out, how they should be changed. And, we're talking everything from the police to the probation services to, some would argue, to the courts themselves. At some point, I think the community deserves answers. The families of these women deserve answers.
The seed was sown years before.
I understand you are upset and angry at a criminal justice system that you think has treated you unfairly.
You're putting words in my mouth, and you shouldn't do that. I'm not upset and I'm not angry. I am frustrated with the system.
When we kept bringing it back to the story we were telling, and that was the story of what happened on that day in September, he became frustrated with that.
Did you kill those women?
Are you asking me a question when I just told you that all this other stuff first has to be brought in the open?
Basil Borutski today, as we understand it, is still in jail in the Ottawa Detention Centre, and no date has yet been set for his trial.
You don't care to hear the real story, do you? Make an appointment to see me and talk to me for about 10 hours and understand before you judge me.
I'm not judging you, Mr. Borutski. I'm asking a question.
You're judging me.
And that's that.
It was an ordinary day last September, just after breakfast. In a small town west of Ottawa, a woman was killed. But she wasn't the first woman to die that day, and she wouldn't be the last. The police were hunting for a suspect, a man known for decades to be dangerous. Why did no one stop him? You're listening to The Secrets of the Fifth Estate, and I'm Gillian Findlay. This episode of Secrets of the Fifth Estate was produced by Cecil Fernandez, Chelsea Gomez, Megan Griffith-Green, and Mika Anderson.
Check out all of our investigations on YouTube at youtube.com/CBC5th.